All right, let's get started. Welcome everybody to this special seminar today. I'm very pleased to be hosting this, for me at least, rather unusual topic. About 2 or 3 months ago, I got an email out of the blue. Oh, by the way, my name is Kevin Lynch. I'm the director of the Center for Robotics and Biosystems and a professor in mechanical engineering here. Just to tell you a little bit about who I am. A few months ago, I got an email from this person named Raizin. I didn't know the name, but of course, the first thing I did was look up Lou and found out that he was the president and CEO of Broadway in Chicago, something I'm very fond of. My wife and I and our kids go to lots of shows that Lou's group puts on. But I couldn't guess why Lou was interested in meeting with me. So he offered to come up to Northwestern or have me come down to his place downtown. And I said, well, I want to take the opportunity to come downtown. And so I went down and visited Lou. And he also sent me a couple of articles in advance to tell me some of the things that he was thinking about. So Lou has been a long time promoter of all things cultural here in Chicago. And as president and CEO of Broadway in Chicago, he has made Chicago into the third most important theater city in the entire world. And so we've all benefited from that. And I was wondering, why would he want to talk to a robotics guy? And so before I came to meet Lou, I read a couple of the articles that he sent me, where Lou is proposing a cultural stadium in Chicago. A really exciting vision for how the arts can enliven downtown, even beyond where we are now, and create new opportunities for tourism and for bringing the city together. So I spent an hour with Lou downtown. He was telling me about some of his ideas, and I said, I've got to connect with other people at Northwestern because this is too big just for me. And I know there are a lot of brilliant people here at Northwestern who can contribute to this idea. So the first thing I did was contact Alice Boone and Malcolm McIver, one of my colleagues here, and said, look, you guys, who are the right people to bring to meet Lou when he presents this idea? And Alice, thanks very much for putting together this really exciting group of people from across the university with ideas that could possibly contribute to Lou's vision. So with that, I will let Lou tell you about the vision because it's much more eloquent than I am. So please join me in welcoming Lou Raizin.
Well, one of the things I hope we can do by the time we end this presentation is to change how it's represented. It's not my vision, it's our vision. It's about transforming our downtown. It's thinking about our downtown as a cultural stadium. I take the position that in March, a year ago in March, I wrote an op-ed in the Tribune suggesting that if we are going to think about the power of stadiums, there's one more stadium we should be thinking about. Sports stadiums, from my perspective, don't make economic sense. But you do it for other reasons. I'm not opposed to sports stadiums, but don't pretend it's about the economics. And I used the example of Broadway in Chicago. We're a small piece of culture in this city, but we do 1,700,000 to 1,800,000 people a year. We throw off an economic output to the city and state that approaches $1 billion annually. And I take the position that if we're going to consider stadiums, let's talk about culture at the same time. You know, I take the position that our people working in our offices didn't threaten to move to Schaumburg if they didn't get what they want. They just decided to stay at home. Our retail didn't threaten to move to another city. They just left. So if you want to talk about these kinds of issues that are being pushed back against government and against the city, let's think about how we can react to them.
They call it the donut effect. COVID-19's hollowing out the heart of American cities. Downtown economies are still struggling to recover, and now is the time to redefine what downtown means. Time and again, Chicago has proven that culture is the driving force behind civic reinvention. Architecture fueled our rebirth after the Great Fire. Sports electrified Chicagoans and placed the city in the national spotlight. The theater district became a magnet for large-scale entertainment and tourism. Millennium Park drew millions to the lakefront, boosting businesses and attractions alike. Today, Chicago's culture continues to reflect our diversity and collaborative spirit. Look around. From Oak Street Beach through the South Loop, Chicago boasts 250 cultural assets, 120 works of public art, 11 performing arts venues, 13 museums and galleries, the nation's most significant historic architecture, an array of sports stadiums, and hundreds of restaurants. Together, they attract 28 million visitors to downtown Chicago each year, generating an annual economic impact exceeding $2 billion. But many Chicagoans feel that downtown does not belong to them. And many others around the world remain unaware of all the things we have to offer. It's time to change that, to invite Chicagoans and world travelers alike to embrace this magnificent city. It's time to celebrate the incredible talent in our own backyard by elevating our artists and the organizations that bring their visions to life. It's time to create something new for future generations. It's time to transform the perception of Chicago from old guard to vanguard. It's time for Chicago to create a cultural stadium. Some hear stadium and think building. Rather, the cultural stadium is a movement centered on culture, anchored by community, and enriched by the creative energy that defines us. Some hear stadium and think arena. Instead, the cultural stadium is a beacon that shines a spotlight on Chicago's trend-setting, scene-stealing creativity. Some hear stadium and think infrastructure. In truth, the cultural stadium embodies Chicago's yes and collaborative spirit, which is our creative foundation for growth and innovation. With cultural visionaries leading the charge and bold thinkers fueling momentum, through this cultural stadium initiative, Chicago will become a 24/7 central city with culture as our North Star. How will we do it? By thinking differently, innovatively, boldly. Chicago has never made small plans, and this is no time to start. Across the globe, cities that prioritize quality of life thrive on culture. Coupled with economic power, these cities attract and retain residents, tourists, businesses, and investments. The cultural stadium is our uniquely Chicago approach to this vision. Where others see abandoned alleys and blank walls, we see the first floor of the public realm. Where others see bridges and roads, we see celebrations of light and pride. Where others see buildings as barriers, we see them as invitations to gather and create. To lay the groundwork, our first phase will launch 3 key initiatives. The cultural umbrella will provide families with children aged 3 to 13 free access to Chicago's cultural resources on an unprecedented scale. A new artist residency program will activate underutilized spaces for year-long, rent-free studios for artists, supporting the creation of new work and public art, retaining and elevating our creative community, and establishing a talent pipeline between educational institutions and the arts sector. And the Trove Project will transform unused and overlooked spaces into showcases of museum-held artwork, unlocking access to the 90% of collections currently unseen by the public. And that's just the beginning. All told, the Cultural Stadium envisions a true metamorphosis of downtown Chicago. It will enrich our neighborhoods, redefine our city's cultural landscape, and cement Chicago as a world-class creative capital. Because culture is not only what makes Chicago unique, culture is what makes Chicago, Chicago.
So one of the issues that I fought one of the issues I fought hard on is this, I am all about funding South and West. But to me, it's not a binary choice of South and West or downtown. It needs to be both. And if we change the perception, if we change the reality of our downtown, it becomes everyone's downtown. Neighborhood kids don't see downtown as theirs. We need to change that. And that's what this effort from 3 to 13, you come as a family, we got you, you're in. And downtown to me is Central City. I'm not, I don't think there's a reason to define it with hard lines, but it's this concept of everyone's place. Coming out of COVID, one person said to me something that stuck. They need to fall in love with Chicago all over again. In COVID, we dealt with a number of things that needed to be dealt with, needed to be talked about, needed to be pushed around. But it's still there. It's still this, it's still troubled, and we need to work hard on thinking about how to change it. McKinsey studied 3 failing downtowns, Chicago being one of them after COVID. And they said that the sooner the city responds, the less it's going to cost and the faster the city will recover. But they also recommended that everybody rally around a North Star. And to me, that North
Chicago's Cultural Stadium is a new vision to reconnect, reimagine, and revitalize our downtown through adaptive reuse. Through a framework of initiatives, we will transform our city into an international cultural district, reflecting our diverse and collaborative spirit and underscoring that Chicago's downtown belongs to everyone. To catalyze new energy, we must activate our unoccupied spaces. We propose turning a portion of our vacant offices into temporary year-long residencies, inviting artists to call downtown the place where they work. We go further by creating a new venue that serves as a trove, showcasing collections of seldom-seen artworks from established institutions and cultural partners. By transforming our underappreciated assets, we breathe new life into our city. The Chicago River is downtown's central axis, and we need to reimagine its role from industrial waterway to a cultural infrastructure of architecture and history. We propose creating new events along all 3 branches, a bold new music festival, charming family-oriented spectacles, floating farmers markets, and many summertime experiences. By establishing new zoning guidelines, we catalyze investment in our public realm. These bylaws would lock in assessed property values in exchange for dedicating a portion of space for cultural use. New installations would emerge from Oak Street Beach through the South Loop, bringing renewed energy back to our streets, buildings, and alleyways. Arts have fueled our city's soul since the beginning, and culture has proven to be one of our most reliable economic engines. It's now time for a new downtown renaissance, powered by Chicago's Cultural Stadium.
To me, I look at conventions as a dying industry. The only way you get a new convention is you steal it from somebody else and you overpay for it to begin with. Excuse me, I'm the doorbell for my 97-year-old mother-in-law. The tourism is the economic growth opportunity, major economic growth opportunity, where we have no obligations from the city against it. Today's tourists are experiential collectors. It's not about taking the crap home, buying that stuff and, finding a place where it rots at your house after you brought it home. But it's about the experience. It's finding that something, it's feeling that something. And culture is our differentiator to our competitive set. It's why people come to Chicago. But, what is culture? It's ultimately what makes us us. It's the music we listen to. It's the crazy shit we do. It's our dance. It's our food. It's the things we're known around the world for. It's those myths we live by. It's the stories that we tell that speak to who we are. And it's those things that touch our hearts. But ultimately, it's what brings us together at the end of the day. I think about art's impact on zoning. I go see the zoning commissioner, and she says, in the years she's been in that seat, she said, you're the first person to use the word arts and culture, talking about zoning. And since I've been here, but I use the example of New York in the 90s. Not necessarily the most wonderful place to be. And the title starving artists are real. And so artists are attracted to that place that they can afford to do their work. You know, their work comes before that food on the table or that roof over their head, oftentimes. And they become that beacon that draws others to them. And that was the transformation of New York. You know, the transformation from Tribeca to now Dumbo, you know, as it made its way. The gentrification is a whole other problem we need to deal with. But this power of arts as that lure is powerful. Berlin today, there's 20,000 artists living and working in Berlin because they can afford it. You know, we need to think about that. Chicago, prior to Broadway in Chicago, prior to Daley throwing down, creating the tax increment financing district, the TIF district, that was the bait on the hook that we bid on, and we bid hard. When you look back on it, he didn't throw that much money down there, but it was enough to energize us. The Loop looked very differently. What was then the Michael Todd is now the Goodman Theater, was playing porn films. You know, there was movies playing. If the theater was open in a theater and there were only three of them, they were playing movies. The Schubert Theater was the only operating theater in the town at the time. State and Lake is gone. And the TIF district really made that difference. And to me, the most powerful number of my theaters downtown is that 52% of our audience for our long run shows comes from 100 miles away or more. Those are tourists coming to the city. As I said, it's like printing money from the city's perspective. But there's an awful lot of other assets in this cultural downtown, if we think about them in a holistic way. And they're not often talked about that way. We need to transform the perception that's heard round the world of Chicago, from old guard to vanguard. Even creating competitions, design competitions, to reimagine our streets shows us we're thinking forward, shows us that we understand there's something to talk about here, and shows us we're interested in big and bold. We need to think about our festivals, you know, what I call the pickle on a stick. Taste of Chicago, we've seen it long enough. It needs to go. We need to think about what's next. What else can we do? And one of the examples I use is these little yellow rubber ducks that you had in the bathtub as a kid. There are thousands of them with a number on the bottom of every duck. And the Special Olympics is who does this. You bet on a duck, you buy your duck for the day, and you hope your duck wins the race as they dump these ducks into the river, and they all race down the river, and the fire department boats push it down the river, and you're rooting, you hope your friggin' duck wins the race. But I want to add one more duck. I want to add one more duck to that race. I want in the spring of the year, I want our bridges to open, and I want a tugboat to pull the stupid duck down to the end of the Riverwalk to its perch at Wolf Point. And let me tell you why I think about this stupid duck. Most of the people have probably heard there's a Riverwalk that's been improved in the city. Most of them haven't looked down from Upper Wacker to see it in fact being there. And fewer have gone down there. And I'm not saying it's not doing well, but the concept behind this stupid duck is its head sticks above Upper Wacker. There's no question you see something like that, you're going to go down there and say, why has somebody done something that stupid? You're going to look down there and you're going to go down there. And that becomes an Instagram moment seen around the world from Chicago. But it's a story. That Instagram moment sits on our river that differentiates Chicago from the rest of the world, with our backdrop of our architecture behind the stupid duck. So there's a story to be told and a reason for that duck's being. I think about lighting and lighting festivals, and Chicago had a lighting festival, and this one was back in 1926. And then it was just basically celebrating we can turn on the damn lights. It's 250,000 people show up on State Street. But I look at these lighting festivals that take place around the world. And Lyon is really the mothership, where it started as a religious event with candles in the window. And these events flourish around the world. And I use the example of the sails on the Sydney Opera House. They were never intended to be lit like this by design, but for a lighting festival. And when a lighting festival came in and they lit these sails, those are now postcards from Sydney seen around the world that speak to arts and culture from that city. I headed up a group when Ram was mayor, and most of the things I do are road. This was one of them. I headed up the lighting framework plan for the city. And it was an international design competition to think about lighting in Chicago. We did some work with Boston Consulting Group, and BCG comes back and they tested 12 different concepts we had, regionally, nationally, and internationally. And one of the things that came out of these concepts is the power of lighting. And anytime we aligned lighting with something, the value of that something went up dramatically. And if we aligned lighting with something and water, it really shot through the roof. So it was to reimagine lighting in Chicago, not like Singapore, not like any other place in the world, but what could be authentic, what should be in Chicago that would feel right. And so lighting was one of the things we played with. You know, I was also the crazy guy that thought a gondola would be the right thing going down our river, an aerial gondola. And I worked on that program. But one of the things I was able to pull off is the lighting on the back of the merchandise mart. And with Ram's help and Vornado's financial support, a $12 million permanent installation came to be. And at the time, one of the concepts we threw out there is you gamify it. You could actually play the wall, play the mark, play the art. And you see the woman at the bottom right corner, she's engaged that way. But there's one more wall to do, and this is on the back wall of the lyric opera. And I take the position that the lyrics audience is dying off, literally. And anything we can do to communicate the spectacle and the grandeur that's on that stage every day is powerful. Throughout the city. I think about Lower Wacker, and as strange as Lower Way it sounds, I see Lower Wacker as not only a lighting opportunity, I see Lower Wacker as an urban festival site. To me, you look at that space. I've also often thought about what if you gave an artist a street as their canvas? And what if you gave 7 artists 7 streets, what that may be like? And all of those streets don't need to be in our downtown. They can be in neighborhoods as well. But that becomes a conversation about Chicago heard around the world. What if we thought about our river? We thought about barges, part of the history of Chicago. And maybe there's a farmer's market barge that shows up on Thursdays on the Riverwalk. And maybe on Fridays, it's at your neighborhood, somewhere else on the river. And maybe there's a food truck barge where all the neighborhood food trucks come downtown and they move around on alternating days with the farmer's market. Or maybe the theater barge comes to you. I thought about Michigan Avenue. Michigan Avenue, our tourists are showing up at Michigan Avenue looking for that retail experience that was there the last time they were in Chicago. That's no longer there. They're gone. So how do we deliver to those people? Well, one of the ways of thinking about it is arts and culture. Janet Epelman knows how to play with space, suspend these incredible pieces of art that sit up there on a permanent installation basis as part of that spectacle, part of that animating of our city. One of the things I think we need to think about is a 24/7 city. Energy breeds energy. The more people we can keep out at night, the more the lights stay on, the safer things are. It may be counterintuitive, but it's the reality. If we think about mayors of the night have been proliferating through Europe for years. These are people who's focused on the nighttime economy. How can I support it? How do we get people out of your way? What do you need done differently that's not being done for you now? How can we make that happen? In New York, the nighttime economy is $36 billion a year. It supports 300,000 people and throws off $800 million in taxes to the city. These mayors of the night are starting to happen in the United States, but Chicago's not on that list. The city's thrown down $500 million to support the redevelopment of 5 to 7 buildings on LaSalle Street. And part of the obligation against them is they need to be mixed use. And mixed use means a portion of that space needs to be low-income housing. But who the hell wants to live on LaSalle Street? Batman doesn't pick LaSalle Street because it's a warm, fuzzy place to be. When the lights go down, you don't want to be there. But what can we do to transform that kind of space? I think about these buildings and these spaces that we have in our downtown, much like mausoleums. They're incredible pieces of architecture with no life in them. And to me, how do we transform that feeling? I've done some significant travel tied to this project recently. And this is a bookstore in Portugal. The only way you get into that bookstore is you buy a timed admissions ticket to experience the space. There's another one in the Netherlands, a 600-year-old Dominican church. I bought a book just to experience that space. Timed admissions tickets. We have this kind of space in our cultural downtown. This is the Rookery, Frank Lloyd Wright's design. I'm not saying it should be the most incredible bookstore in the world, but what can we do to breathe life into that space and celebrate it? So I start thinking about the street and breaking the verticality. There's no color, there's no light. How do we transform it? What examples do we have from around the country? And I end up on this slide, the Tate Modern. You think about putting a slide off a building on LaSalle Street. If one person goes down that slide or not, to me is irrelevant. It changes the way you think about that street. It's not the same street that it was before. You know, these kinds of interventions in our streets are happening around the country. The shopping center in Tokyo, incredibly popular, right down the middle of a street. Salesforce Park in San Francisco is an incredible world-class park that sits down the middle of a street. So I started riffing, me and AI, start thinking about what might that feel like if we start playing with that kind of concept. Do we riff off of the L tracks? Do we do something that's big and bold that says this is not that same city that it was before? Do we invite the international design competition with architects from around the world to give us their thoughts? I think about expanding the public realm. And this is, that red line is LaSalle. I look at these donut holes in these buildings. Those are light corridors that were built into these buildings prior to air conditioning, so they could open their windows. But to me, they're pocket parks. That's an opportunity. And if we can connect them, we can open them up, if we can create some kind of passageway, we're starting to make this space, this LaSalle Street, feel very differently. There are opportunities up and down LaSalle if we think about it and we spend the time on it. I don't know if you're familiar with 1871. It's been engaged in the merchandise market from a tech incubator standpoint. I want to create another 1871, and this one for the visual and performing arts. And maybe we take a number of assets as an example that are flourishing in New York, and we bring them all together. And maybe they're in one of those mixed-use buildings on LaSalle Street, where we create this incubator for the visual and performing arts, where we build a 60-seat theater, an 80-seat theater, a 120-seat theater, where these theaters, 220 theaters that make up the League of Chicago Theaters, more than 20% of them don't have a place to call home. The Harris Theater in downtown serves as home for 9 dance companies. I think there's something powerful in thinking about an 1871 for the visual and performing arts. One of the things that it touches my heart is I get an invite to a meeting by a guy named Pepe Vargas. Pepe is working on the International Latino Cultural Center, the 12 flags of the Latin diaspora he wants to put under one roof. He wants to celebrate who they are and what they are, and share it with the rest of the world. And he wants to do it in this cultural stadium. We're working on that. I think about our spaces differently. And believe it or not, this is our pedway. And if you've ever been down in the pedway, it's not the most beautiful thing on good days. You know, at best, at some point in its history, it looked that clean. I don't know when. But it doesn't take much to transform that space. And maybe a section of that pedway. I think about that river, and I think about program journeys. And I think about picking up tourists at Navy Pier and taking them on a journey down the river, past Ping Pong Park, and taking them to a space at Cermak and the River that's been on the on DCASE's map for 12 years. And that's an artist creative industries district. Cermak and the River, I think, has the opportunity of being the power of North Avenue at its height in the city of Chicago. And you have smack dab, it's 1.2 miles from Cermak and the River to McCormick Place. And you have Chinatown and Motor Row smack dab in the middle. I think of building a dock at Cermak and the River and taking those warehouses and turning them into artists live, work, and play spaces. This is a warehouse in the Netherlands. And they took this was an abandoned warehouse, and nothing was happening other than one thing. It was covered in graffiti, and the graffiti was covered over every week as some artist painted something new on that space. And they took the far left-hand space on that building, they turned it into the museum for graffiti. They invited those artists painting on the outside inside to show us your stuff. It elevated those artists in a dramatic way and celebrated them. And you worked out, you go in the further right down that building and you walk into the Netherlands Dock and Shipbuilding Company. And it's a building of buildings. These are studios for artists where the public engages with those artists in their spaces. You go through there, you see the artists doing their work, you purchase works, but you elevate them. You've given them that place to celebrate who they are and what they do. I take the position that are looking at our highways, at the expressways that were built around Chicago in the 60s. And to me, it's a moat that was built around the city. You stay on your side of the moat, we stay on our side of the moat. Well, it's time to blow up the moat. This is a section of the Stevenson down at McCormick Place where you see that green spot with the arrows over it. To me, it's time to plank over it and create a place, a unity park, a place that brings us all together, a place that doesn't show us this is the dividing line between the South and the North. You stay on this side, you stay on ours. We get rid of that spaces. There's another space that I want to plank over. Google at the top right-hand corner is coming into the state of Illinois building with 3,000 people. And they will go to 6,000 people if they, quote, feel the energy, close quote. Want to help them feel that energy. And a good chunk of that energy is in the West Loop. You think about this space in the West Loop. To me, I want to plank that one over, but I want to plank over it differently. This is the Markethal in Rotterdam. It's not only an incredible piece of architecture, but think of it as the passageway between the Loop and the West Loop, that connector that you pass through. But what's so incredible about this space is not only the architecture, but the art, but it's an international food festival. And if you think about food being the connection between the West Loop and the Loop, you blur the line from this side to that side. It's irrelevant. It all becomes one. So I started thinking, me and AI, started thinking, how might that feel to be more authentic in Chicago? I'm not sure what it is, but I'm convinced food is a big part, whatever that turns out to be. This is the depot in Rotterdam. Major museums in their holdings, in the high 90% of their holdings are in warehouses. The major museum in Rotterdam had 4 warehouses storing their works. But the major museum needed to go through a renovation and they needed to find a place to store that work. So they built one. They built this depot as a warehouse, but they turned the concept of the warehouse on its head. It's open to the public. You can see not only this incredible piece of architecture, but you can see these works that but for this warehouse, they wouldn't have been seen before. I take the position that this is the stock exchange building that was built by Louis Sullivan, designed by Louis Sullivan. It was on LaSalle Street and the building was being torn down. And the Art Institute, just prior to building the new modern wing, said, if you don't want that and you're going to tear it down, we do. And they took it apart board by board and put it into the new modern wing of the Art Institute. Well, I take the position at the end of the street, we have another one of those transformations. The Board of Trade. It's no longer there. It's gone. And I take the position, if we're going to think about this street differently, let's put a nose on the damn building. Let's scream that this is not the same space. This is not the same place. And this is a place that's all about arts and culture. Maybe we take that space that's abandoned, that's no longer used, and maybe that becomes that art warehouse, that depot in our cultural downtown. I think about our first floor in the public realm and our alleyways. We're a city of alleyways. How do we think about transforming these alleyways into assets The belt in Detroit did just that. An alleyway that's now on the destination of the must-see places for visitors going to Detroit. An alleyway. This is the Chicago Theater alleyway. Right to the left is the Chicago Theater. I take the position as I presented to to a group from the Poetry Foundation that should be Poetry Way. And damn it, it's going to be. That's going to be Poetry Way. Now, this is just me and AI again, so don't think that's what it's going to look like. But it worked, and the Poetry Foundation is claiming it as the place they're going to plant the flag. And the beauty of it is not only they're creating Poetry Way in this cultural stadium downtown, but they're going to work with every neighborhood in the city to think about how to think the same way and transform a space in your neighborhood into a Poetry Way. Think about transforming our streets, thinking about our sidewalks. You know, we have visitors showing up, still looking for the same experience that's no longer there from a tourism standpoint and retail. So we need to think about how do we maybe twice a year transforming our streets themselves and our sidewalks and putting those cafes outside. And maybe it's 3 season spaces we think about on Michigan Avenue that starts to transform how that space is used. And thinking about lighting, wherever we can put it, that transforms the feeling of the place and space. This is one of the slides I use when I talk to city government, because this is really how I need them to think. You know, it's hard for them to think big and bold because they're going to get voted out. Jarvik is the guy that invented the artificial heart. And you got to believe that there's a way of making this stuff happen because you need to. It needs to get done. This stuff needs to happen. And one of the things that's crazy important and gives the permission to the politicians to think big and bold is when it's temporary. The Eiffel Tower was temporary. The Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago was temporary. There are things that get done that are temporary. The London Eye was temporary. So if we think about it the right way, Cranes a few months back threw down the gauntlet, said, okay, it's been 20 years since Millennium Park. I haven't told this story in 33 years until that gauntlet was thrown. But 33 years ago, I went to and thought I had the right political alignment with me. And I had built, first half of my career as a concert promoter, I built a 25,000 seat amphitheater in Chicago called Poplar Creek and 7 others around the country. And until Sears decided they wanted the 375 acres that we had for their New World headquarters. And the money was so stupid, we sold. But I spent the next year thinking about where I'm going to relocate Poplar Creek because I knew the market was that hot, that important, and we understood it well. And so I went, I looked site after site, I worked on it, I did study after study to support it. And I went in with the right, what I thought political alignment to see Daley, Mayor Daley. And I said, I want to do a public-private partnership with you. And I want to build another Poplar Creek. And this is where I'm going to put it. And he said, I love it. Let's do it. And I didn't have the foresight to think you could plank over at the time. 34 years ago, you could plank over railroad tracks, but others did. And I took the Montgomery Ward's Forever Free and Clear ordinance into account in the design of this new facility, building a legitimate theater on the same back spine of the outdoor theater. And, you know, nobody in government will say no. Daley said, I love it, let's do it. But then you make your way through the minions, and the way they tell you no is you don't get meetings, you don't get calls returned. And then we got cold, and about 8 months later, nothing was going on. I reached out to my political partner and I said, what do you think? And he said, let's go back and see Daley again. We go back and see Daley. I love it, let's do it. See the same thing all over again. And we get the same response from his minions. Until 10 months later, there's a full page in the Chicago Tribune as the city announces Millennium Park. And I reached out to my political operative and he said, we have a meeting tomorrow morning at a restaurant called Manny's downtown Chicago with Ed Bedore and Tim Degnan, for two Daley's top guys. And I'm about to sit down at the table. And my business card is, I think I've told others, says asshole on one side, and it was on the asshole side right now. As we sit down to have breakfast. And he says, Lou, you should be thrilled. And I said, well, tell me how thrilled I should be. He said, your project's happening. He said, but I have to tell you the story. He says, Richie comes to me and says, we need a big project, a big capital project for the millennium. I said, I didn't have anything to tell him. I said, I go away that weekend. I come back on Monday. He said, I see your pile of shit on the floor that's 2 feet tall next to my desk. He says, that's it. That's what we're going to do. So feel good. Your project's happening. So I tell this story now, and I had no reason to tell it for those 34 years. But to me, there are two things in recent history that have transformed our downtown: the theater district and Millennium Park. And I take the position it's time for culture to do it all over again. This is where we start. You saw it in the video. The kids program, building community in our downtown, and building that art warehouse. Those are the first three programs that we're starting with. And I also take the position that there's no pride of authorship or ownership in this. It needs to get done. This is about making shit happen. And we're here to explore with Northwestern how we do this together. At least a piece of it. So thank you. Questions?
Sure.
Actually, a broader question. I know one of the reasons that downtown and areas like the arts are struggling because the basic costs of living, like housing, groceries, et cetera, have become so expensive that especially younger and middle class families just don't have the disposable income to access any of those quote unquote extra opportunities. I know you talked about making the kids initiative free for those families with young kids. Do you have any idea of how to tackle the issue of slightly older demographics with making that like financially feasible for them?
Well, I think that's part of the $500 million that the city's throwing down for those 5 to 7 buildings of mixed use. That understands the housing process, the project, the housing issues. You know, one of the things I'm working with, this effort is, to me, this is a Millennium Park level of effort. It's going to take an alignment with civic, corporate, and philanthropic all working together. But part of the group that I'm dealing with includes developers, and we have one developer that's thinking about the housing issues in particular. And the city happens to own more real estate than anyone else in the city. And so his position is to think about the city being the biggest landlord in the city as well. That if you think about coming in with modular construction in these neighborhoods where they live, you don't force somebody to have to go to someplace else that they don't want to go to because it's a better price. If you can create that living experience for them in the space they want to live in, and that property the city owns, you come in with modular housing. It can be incredible. It can be a game changer. So there are ways that are that people are thinking about to do just that.
So Lou, one of the things that we talked about a couple months ago was a specific alley and the opportunity there. And I think that would be really exciting.
So let me take you to that place if I can. If I don't screw it up. So when I reached out to Kevin, and I didn't tell him at the time what I wanted to talk to him about.
And right next to the station, it's what appears to be a guy stuck drawing on the hands of the clock for every single minute. Check out the way that he scrapes off the old hands and then manually draws on the new hands. This couldn't be, isn't. And the reason this looks lifelike is because they're recorded for 12 hours of an actual guy scraping off the time and drawing on every single minute.
He does it again. And this one is in the airport in Amsterdam. And it's the same damn thing. You see this, you can't believe what you're seeing. Much like that clock, it's something just like there's nowhere else in the world you can see that kind of experience, have that kind of experience. And he plays it out even on the back side of it. You see a little window and the door opens up where somebody, you can think of this is how the guy gets in and out because there's a ladder there. Nobody goes in there. You see the back side of him is recorded, that's projected on the screen as well. So he plays this whole thing out. This is the belt in Detroit we just talked about as another one of those examples in Poetry Way. And here's what happened. When I presented Poetry Way to the Poetry Foundation, I have the alley that's across the street from it, across State Street, on the other side behind the Niederlander Theater. And I get FOMO. I said, damn it, these guys are going to do Poetry Way. What am I going to do with my alley? So I think about that alleyway. It's now called Niederlander Way. And I start thinking, well, maybe I'll do lighting there because lighting is cheap. It can be impressive. It can be experiential. And there's different ways of playing with it. But then I realized I can't do light because I can't have people there at night because our back wall of theater's right there. Can't have that sound. So I start thinking, well, what else could I do in that space? And then I come up with puppets. And of course I come up with puppets, and that's what leads me to Northwestern. But to me, puppets come in different forms and fashion. And I think about the puppet for Warhorse. I think about the puppets for Lion King. I think about the puppets from Royal Deluxe. I took a group to Edinburgh to experience these incredible French puppets as they parade down the street. And the people in red, they call them Lilliputians. And because of the scale, it's just mind-blowing. This dog is one of those puppets that goes down the street. And he comes along and finds a fire hydrant, and he does what dogs do in the fire hydrant. There are ways of thinking about puppets differently, but I see robots, and I think animation, and I think, you know, that kind of movement in this alleyway. What can we do? So again, it's me and AI. And I say, well, maybe we put a box up there, and maybe somebody wakes up at certain times of the day. And maybe there's a doorway that opens up and somebody talks to us. And maybe there's some other way of thinking about how we twice a day or 3 times a day, some incredible magic happens in the only place in the world and you experience it. And it's in an alleyway. I don't know what it is. You know, do puppets play with puppets? But to me, it's a piece of theater tied to this magic that I think is something that is that special, that can sit in, of all places, an alleyway that's free and open to the public. So that's what brings me here. And I don't know if you know this children's book, but it's this little kid and his story and his relationship with the robot. There's a piece of theater that we can create around this experience that happens 2 or 3 times a day. So that's what brings me to Northwestern.